The morning air in Lagos was thick with the usual hustle and bustle of a city that never seemed to sleep. Cars honked, buses screeched to a halt, and vendors yelled their wares on every street corner. Amidst the chaos, the young girl walked quietly, almost unnoticed by the busy crowd. Adaora, dressed in a faded blue school uniform, her shoes scuffed from years of use, clutched a small leather bag. She kept her head down, trying to avoid the curious gazes that often followed her. She wasn't anyone special here. No one could tell that beneath the worn-out uniform and messy ponytail was the daughter of the richest man in Lagos, Chief Chidi Okafor, a man whose name was known and revered in every corner of the city. The mansion she called home was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Lagos. It was filled with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a staff of servants who catered to every whim of her father. Adaora had grown up surrounded by luxury, but it had never felt like home. She had never asked for all of it. The expensive cars, the private jet, the lavish parties, it all felt suffocating, like a mask that no one could ever see past. Her father, Chief Okafor, was a man of immense wealth and power. He owned sprawling businesses that ranged from oil to real estate. He didn't have time for anything other than his work, and his relationship with Adaora was distant, often cold. He never asked about her feelings or dreams. All he cared about was her status, the image of perfection she presented to the world. As Adaora walked down the street toward her school, her mind was clouded with the same thoughts that had plagued her for months. She had always felt out of place in her own world, trapped in a gilded cage that her father had built around her. But when she had reached the age of 15, she had made a decision to attend a public school, far away from the endless media attention and the unspoken expectations of being the perfect daughter. She didn't want to live a life dictated by wealth and privilege. She wanted to know what it felt like to be just another girl. The school she had chosen was the opposite of everything she had known. It was crowded, noisy, and far from the polished private schools she had attended before. But it felt real. The students there weren't concerned with designer brands or luxury vacations. They were focused on surviving, on making it through the day, and finding small joys in the little things. Adaora had wanted to experience that, to feel like she wasn't just an extension of her father's name. But she hadn't anticipated the hardships she would face. Adaora arrived at the school gates and was immediately swallowed by the noise. The students, who were used to the steady rhythm of their daily lives, barely noticed her arrival. She wasn't special to them, just another new student who would soon fade into the background. She made her way to her class, hoping to blend in. Her new classmates eyed her curiously as she took her seat at the back of the room, a few snickers echoing through the hall. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her appearance. She wore a school uniform that had clearly seen better days, and her hair was a tangled mess of curls that didn't quite fit the neat, immaculate look of the other girls in her class. It didn't take long before she was the subject of whispers. Some thought she was a village girl, others assumed she was too shy to speak up. Adaora kept her head down and focused on her books, not daring to attract attention. But despite her best efforts to remain invisible, one person noticed her immediately: Chika. Chika, the queen bee of the school, was the kind of girl everyone feared and admired. She had the perfect balance of beauty, confidence, and wealth that made her impossible to ignore. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels in the city, and her mother was a well-known socialite, always in the front row at the most exclusive events. Chika always wore the latest brands, her uniform spotless, her hair done up in perfectly styled braids. She had a commanding presence, everyone wanted to be her friend, and everyone feared crossing her. When Chika saw Adaora sitting at the back of the class, her curiosity piqued. She had never seen this girl before, and something about her seemed off. There was a quiet dignity about Adaora, but it wasn't the kind of dignity that came with wealth. It was something else. Something more reserved. Chika, ever the social climber, couldn't help but wonder who this girl was and why she seemed so out of place. It wasn't long before Chika made her move. "Hey, new girl," she called, her voice sharp and commanding. "What's your name? You look like you're fresh from the village. I didn't know they let people like you into this school." Adaora stiffened, her heart racing. She didn't know how to respond. She had hoped to keep a low profile, but it seemed Chica wasn't about to let that happen. "I'm Adora," she said quietly, not looking up. Chica smiled cruelly, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Adora, huh? Well, don't get too comfortable. You don't exactly fit in here. People like you don't belong with the elite." Adora felt a pang in her chest. She wanted to say something, to tell Chica that she wasn't some village girl, but she bit her tongue. She didn't want to escalate the situation. After all, this was the life she had chosen, and she would have to endure it. But as the days went on, the bullying escalated. Chica didn't stop at just taunts and jabs. She made sure to point out Adeora's worn shoes, her untidy hair, and her modest demeanor. In front of the class, Chica would make loud, sarcastic comments, "Maybe she's so poor she can't even afford a comb," or "What's the matter, new girl? Did you forget how to smile?" Adeora tried to ignore her, but it wasn't easy. The whispers were constant, and even her teachers seemed to look at her with suspicion. She couldn't understand why Chica was so obsessed with her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't about her, it was about Chica's need to feel superior to someone. Despite the bullying, Adeora excelled academically. She was bright, and the subjects came naturally to her. Her teachers noticed her quiet brilliance and often praised her in front of the class, which only seemed to make things worse. Chica couldn't stand it. How could someone who didn't even care about appearance or status be so good at everything? Chica began to pick on Adeora more, not just during class, but everywhere. She would mock her in the hallways, throw paper balls at her during breaks, and laugh with her friends about how pathetic Adeora was. "She's probably one of those girls who thinks she can get by just being smart," Chica would say, loud enough for Adeora to hear. But through it all, Adeora held her head high. She kept her focus on her studies, ignoring the insults and whispers. Deep inside, she was hurting. She had never imagined that her attempt to live a simpler life would come with so much pain. But she was determined not to let them break her. One day, Adeora met a girl named Ngozi in the library. Ngozi was everything Adeora wasn't: outgoing, loud, and always surrounded by a group of friends. But she had a kindness about her that drew Adeora in. "Hey, I've noticed you sitting alone," Ngozi said one afternoon as she approached Adeora. "Why don't you come sit with us at lunch? Don't let Chica and her friends get to you. They all talk." Adeora hesitated. She had spent so long trying to avoid attention that the idea of sitting with a group of girls seemed terrifying. But there was something about Ngozi's warm smile that made Adeora feel safe. "Thanks," Adeora replied, her voice small. Maybe tomorrow." That afternoon, as Adeora walked to class, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. The first few weeks at school had been tough for Adeora. The constant whispers, the mocking glances, the calculated jabs from her classmates, it was a daily routine she had learned to endure. But nothing prepared her for Chica. Chica had a way of making everyone feel insignificant, as if their existence was a mere decoration to her grand social world. Her friends followed her like loyal sheep, doing whatever she commanded with a smile. They didn't question her authority because, to them, she was everything. To be in Chica's good books was to live in the spotlight. To fall out of favor with her was to be exiled into social obscurity. And Adeora? She was just another target. Chica's cruelty began with subtle remarks, those little digs meant to undermine Adeora's confidence. At first, it was an occasional comment during lunch breaks, like how Adeora's uniform didn't quite fit or how she was always sitting alone. Chica would make sure everyone could hear her. "Adeora, darling, you really need to do something about that uniform. It's like a walking advertisement for desperate for a scholarship," Chica had said one day, flicking her perfectly styled braids over her shoulder, as though she'd just said something witty. The girls at the table laughed, but Adeora just stared at her untouched meal, feeling her stomach tighten. She didn't respond, not because she couldn't, but because she was afraid that saying something would only make it worse. In the world of Chica, silence was a weakness, something to be exploited. But silence wasn't enough to keep Chica at bay. She wanted more. She wanted Adora to suffer the way she had seen others suffer when they dared to step out of line. It was during the school's annual charity event preparations that Chica's true scheme began to unfold. The event was a big deal, one of the few occasions when students could step out of their usual roles and show off their skills or talents. As the self-proclaimed queen of the school, Chica was in charge of organizing the event, making sure everything went smoothly and, more importantly, that everyone knew who was responsible for the success. Adora had tried to stay out of the limelight, focusing on her studies and keeping to herself. But that wasn't enough for Chica. No, she wanted Adora to be the center of attention, for all the wrong reasons. She wanted everyone to know the truth, that Adora wasn't as perfect as she tried to appear. It started with the decorations. "I can't believe they actually let someone like you handle the decorations," Chica had sneered when she saw Adora taking charge of the stage design. "What makes you think you can do something as important as this? You're more used to standing in the background. Isn't that where you belong?" Adora bit her lip, resisting the urge to snap back. Chica's words had a way of cutting deeper than any physical wound. But Adora pushed through, pretending she didn't care, even as her confidence wavered. She knew she was good at what she did, designing, organizing, bringing things to life, but the doubt Chica planted in her mind made her second-guess herself every time. Things got worse when Chica overheard a conversation between Adora and Ngozi in the hallway. Adora had been trying to keep a low profile, but Ngozi insisted on chatting about their plans for the event. Adora had mentioned how her father had donated a large sum of money to the school without anyone knowing, which was meant to help the school cover the event's costs. Adora had learned to be discreet about her family's wealth, but it was difficult to hide when people were always curious. Chica's ears had perked up the moment she heard the word money linked to Adora's name. The next day, Chica started a rumor, one that would haunt Adora for weeks. She told everyone that Adora had been caught stealing food from the school's canteen. The rumor was so outrageous that at first, no one believed it. But as Chica continued to spread it, the seed of doubt was planted. Chica made sure to emphasize that Adora was so desperate that she was stealing food from her classmates, implying that she wasn't only poor, but dishonest and untrustworthy. "Did you hear?" Chica had said loudly to her group of friends. "Apparently, Adora doesn't even have enough money to buy lunch, so she's been swiping food from the canteen." Can you imagine the shame? The whispers spread like wildfire. The teachers started looking at Adora with suspicion, and some students who had once been kind started distancing themselves from her. Adora could feel the eyes on her every time she walked through the halls. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The more she tried to show that she was above the petty rumors, the more they stuck to her like glue. Despite everything, Adora refused to show how much it hurt. She didn't want to give Chica the satisfaction of seeing her cry. But on the inside, she was breaking. She was starting to question her decision to come to this school. She thought she could escape her father's world, his wealth, his expectations, but now it seemed she was trapped in a different kind of cage, one built by Chica's malice. Adora spent hours alone, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. She knew she had the power to stand up to Chica, but she wasn't sure how. Her father's money had never taught her how to handle people like Chica. He had always been about success, power, and keeping up appearances. But that wasn't enough here. Here, Adora had to fight not just for survival, but for the right to be herself. That evening, as Adora sat in her room at the mansion, staring out the window at the distant city lights, she realized that if she was going to survive this school, she would have to change. She had to stop hiding, stop running from who she was. She was Adora Okafor, daughter of Chief Chidi Okafor, but that wasn't all she was. She had her own strengths, her own mind, and she wouldn't let Chica, or anyone else, define her. The next day, Adora came to school determined not to let Chica's words control her. When she walked into the classroom, Chica was already waiting, ready to throw another insult her way. But Adora didn't flinch. She walked straight up to Chica, her voice calm but firm. "You think spreading rumors will make me go away?" Adora said, looking Chica straight in the eye. "You're wrong. I'm not going anywhere." and you won't break me." The other students in the classroom turned to look, surprised at Adeora's sudden confidence. Chika's expression faltered for a brief moment. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Adeora didn't wait for her to respond. She turned and walked away, her head held high. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Adeora had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. She knew the battle wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. No one, not even Chika, could take away her sense of self anymore. The days following Adeora's bold confrontation with Chika were a whirlwind of emotions. Her nerves were constantly on edge, her heart pounding every time she walked into class, unsure of what would happen next. Chika, usually the master of manipulation, seemed caught off guard by Adeora's newfound strength. But she wasn't one to back down easily. Chika wasn't going to let Adeora get away with standing up to her without retaliating. The next few days were tense. Chika watched Adeora closely, as if searching for any crack in her armor. It didn't take long for Chika to come up with a plan. If she couldn't break Adeora through insults or rumors, she would break her spirit by making her life at school a living nightmare. It started subtly. One day, Adeora found her books scattered on the floor, her bag overturned. No one admitted to doing it, but Adeora knew. Chika had a way of turning every corner into a trap. The teachers ignored it, of course. They had no reason to believe anyone would target the quiet girl, especially someone as wealthy as Adeora. Then, there was the note. It was a simple piece of paper slipped into her locker, one that read, "Everyone knows who you really are. Don't pretend you're one of us. You're just a fake." The words were scrawled hastily, but their meaning was clear. Someone wanted her to feel out of place. Adeora stared at the note, the bile rising in her throat. The fear, the isolation, it all came rushing back in that moment. But she wasn't going to give in. Not this time. She crumpled the note in her hand and tossed it into the trash. She had made a promise to herself to fight back, and this was just another test. She would prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she wasn't just some fake girl who couldn't stand on her own. It wasn't all bad. Throughout the turmoil, Adeora found a few allies. Ngozi, who had become her closest friend, never left her side. The two girls spent hours together studying, talking about their dreams, and sharing laughs. Ngozi had her own battles to fight. She wasn't from a wealthy family, and she had always struggled to fit in, but there was something about Adeora's quiet determination that drew her in. "Adeora, I know it's hard, but you're stronger than you think," Ngozi said one afternoon as the two of them sat in the library, their books spread out before them. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not the person they think you are. You're someone with power, real power." Adeora looked at her friend, her lips pressing into a thin smile. She appreciated Ngozi's support, but part of her still felt so small, so invisible in the grand scheme of things. Ngozi continued, "I think you need to show them that they can't bully you anymore. That they can't push you around like they've been doing." Adeora nodded, a sense of resolve settling over her. She wasn't just going to let this go on forever. If she was going to fight back, she needed more than just courage. She needed strategy. She needed to find her voice, her confidence, and make sure everyone knew she wasn't the timid, poor girl they thought she was. But Ngozi wasn't the only one who noticed Adeora's resilience. Slowly, the tide started to turn. Some of the girls in the class, who had once snickered at her expense, started to take notice. They saw how Adeora handled Chika's cruelty with grace. They saw how, despite everything, she kept her head up. One by one, the whispers in the hallway began to shift. No longer was Adeora the girl to mock, she was someone to respect. The charity event was drawing near, and the pressure was mounting. Chika, still intent on making Adeora look like a fool, turned the event into another battlefront. She started spreading rumors that Adeora's decorations were not up to standard, and that her contributions were being overlooked by the committee. The other girls started whispering, wondering if Adeora could really deliver on her promise to help with the event. Adeora, however, remained unfazed. She knew the importance of the event, and she wasn't about to let Chika sabotage it. This was her moment to prove that she wasn't just the quiet girl in the background. She had a vision, one that was beautiful and ambitious, and she was going to see it through. Her designs for the event were a blend of bold colors, vibrant patterns, and symbolic elements drawn from the rich history of Nigeria. She wanted the event to reflect the strength and unity of the country, something that would show her classmates that she was more than just a poor girl pretending to fit in. As the date of the event drew closer, Adaora worked tirelessly. She didn't care if Chika tried to undermine her, she was going to finish what she had started. The day of the event arrived, and the entire school was buzzing with excitement. Students and teachers alike had worked together to set up the decorations, and Adaora's designs were everywhere. The banners, the tablecloths, the centerpieces, all of them reflected the energy and spirit of Nigeria, its culture, and its history. The whole looked nothing like the drab, uninspired space it had been just days before. Chika, as expected, had her own plan. She walked into the hall with her entourage, wearing a tight smile and a too-perfect air of indifference. Her eyes immediately went to the decorations, searching for something to criticize. "I don't get it," she said loudly, hands on her hips. "This looks, well, too much, don't you think? This isn't exactly the kind of classy event I had in mind." Adaora, standing just a few feet away, didn't flinch. She smiled politely and responded calmly, "It's a celebration of our heritage, Chika. I think it speaks for itself." The crowd had gathered by now, and some of the other students overheard the exchange. Adaora's words were measured, but there was an undeniable authority behind them. She wasn't backing down. Chika's face darkened, but before she could retaliate, the headmaster, Mr. Adebayo, approached the stage. He surveyed the room, taking in the vibrant displays Adaora had created. The students waited with bated breath, unsure of what he would say. After a long moment, Mr. Adebayo smiled and nodded. "This is remarkable," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "The effort that's gone into this is clear. I commend the students who have worked so hard to bring this vision to life. Adaora, well done." The students applauded, and for the first time, Adaora felt like she truly belonged. Chika's face twisted in frustration, but the applause drowned out her voice. In that moment, Adaora knew that she had done it. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had earned the respect of her peers. As the event went on, Adaora became more and more confident. She moved through the crowd, greeting her classmates and speaking about the inspiration behind her designs. It was no longer about proving something to Chika, it was about proving something to herself. By the end of the day, Adaora had made her mark. She had not only survived Chika's attempts to break her, but she had come out stronger. The whispers of "poor girl" had faded away, replaced by admiration for someone who was unapologetically herself. Chika, on the other hand, left the event early, her pride wounded and her power diminished. For the first time, Adaora saw her not as the queen bee of the school, but as someone who thrived only on the weakness of others. As Adaora sat on the edge of the stage, watching the event wind down, Ngozi sat beside her. "You did it," Ngozi said, her eyes shining. "I knew you had it in you." Adaora smiled, her heart light for the first time in weeks. "Yeah," she said softly. "I did." It wasn't over yet. The battle wasn't won, but Adaora had taken the first major step in reclaiming her life. The future was still uncertain, and Chika wouldn't let up easily, but Adaora was ready for whatever came next. She had learned that her worth wasn't defined by the clothes she wore or the rumors that spread about her. It was defined by the strength inside her, a strength that no one, not even Chika, could take away. The days that followed the charity event were a whirlwind of emotions for Adaora. She had proven to herself that she wasn't just a victim of circumstance, and that she had the strength to stand up for herself. The respect she had gained from her peers after the event felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the sting of judgment or the whispers behind her back. But the most surprising part of it all? It wasn't just the other students who had begun to change their opinions of her, it was Chika. In the days after the event, Chika's usual confidence had wavered. The once dominant queen bee of the school had become more reclusive, her sharp remarks and biting criticisms replaced by silence. Chica's facade of invincibility had cracked, and Adora could see it. She wasn't as untouchable as she had once seemed. One afternoon, Adora was walking through the school gates when she saw Chica standing alone by the side of the building, her back to the wall. There was no entourage today, no group of followers to back her up. Just Chica. Her face was a mix of frustration and vulnerability. It was a look Adora had never seen before, a glimpse of someone who, too, carried her own burdens. Adora approached slowly, unsure of what to say. "You're not surrounded by your usual crowd today," Adora said softly, her voice carrying no malice, only a touch of curiosity. Chica didn't respond at first. She stared at the ground, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if shielding herself from everything around her. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke. "Everyone thinks I'm a bully, don't they?" Chica's voice was softer than Adora had ever heard it. Adora hesitated, then nodded. "You've made things hard for a lot of people. Including me." Chica nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with something Adora hadn't expected, regret. "I never thought I'd lose control. I was just trying to keep things the way they were. I thought if I was the best at everything, everyone would respect me. But now," she trailed off, looking lost. "You don't have to do this, you know," Adora said gently. "You don't have to tear others down to build yourself up." Chica finally met Adeora's eyes, and for a moment, there was a deep understanding between them, two girls who had been shaped by their own fears, their own insecurities. The bullying had been Chica's shield, her way of protecting herself from the fear of being ordinary, being overlooked. But now, Adora realized, Chica was vulnerable. She was human. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for her to change. Chica let out a deep sigh. "I'm sorry, for everything. For the way I treated you, and everyone else." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "Can we start over? I don't want to be this person anymore." Adora smiled softly, feeling the tension that had been building between them slowly start to dissipate. "I think we can. But you have to show me, not just say it." Chica nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." From that day forward, the dynamics between Adora and Chica changed dramatically. Chica, true to her word, began to show a new side of herself. She stopped the constant bullying and made a genuine effort to be kind, not just to Adora, but to everyone around her. It wasn't an overnight change, but Chica made small steps each day, taking responsibility for her past actions. The other students noticed. The whispers turned into murmurs of approval. The girls who had once followed Chica's every move began to drift away, no longer enthralled by her dominance. They saw that real strength came from kindness, from lifting others up, not from tearing them down. Adora, in turn, found herself forgiving Chica. It wasn't easy, but she understood that sometimes, people acted out of fear or insecurity. What mattered was that Chica had acknowledged her mistakes and was trying to make amends. And as for Adora, she had learned something profound through all of this. She had learned that true strength wasn't just about how well you could withstand adversity, it was also about the courage to show compassion, even to those who had hurt you the most. The months passed, and Adora continued to flourish at school. With Ngozi by her side, she excelled in her studies and found herself becoming more and more involved in extracurricular activities. Her designs for school events became a signature of her talent, and soon, even the teachers began to recognize her as a creative force to be reckoned with. She wasn't just the quiet, poor girl anymore, she was Adora Okafor, a young woman with a voice that commanded respect. Then came the final act, the one that sealed the friendship between Adora and Chica for good. The school's end-of-year ceremony was approaching, and this time, Chica was the one to ask Adora for help with the decorations. She came to Adora one afternoon after school, holding out a piece of paper with a tentative smile. "Will you help me with this?" Chica asked, her voice uncharacteristically humble. "I want this event to be perfect. And I want to make it right, you know? With everyone." Adora looked at her for a moment, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She had been waiting for this moment, and it felt good to see Chica genuinely trying to make things better. Of course. I'd love to. The two of them worked together in perfect harmony, blending their talents to create something truly beautiful for the ceremony. The entire school was amazed at the transformation of the hall, the vibrant colors, the intricate designs, the way every detail seemed to speak of unity and resilience. When the ceremony finally began, Adora stood at the front, her heart swelling with pride. The school had come together in a way she had never imagined. Chica, standing beside her, gave her a reassuring nod, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they both stood in the spotlight, not as rivals, but as equals. As the night went on, the principal took the stage to deliver his speech. He spoke of growth, of change, and of how the students had come together to make their school a better place. Then, to everyone's surprise, he added, "I would like to give a special thanks to two remarkable young women, Adora Okafor and Chica Uche, who, through their hard work and dedication, made this year's ceremony truly unforgettable. You both exemplify what it means to rise above the challenges in front of us." The applause that followed was loud and genuine. Adeora's heart swelled as she looked over at Chica. They had both come a long way. They had both changed, for the better. As the ceremony came to an end, Adora stepped outside, feeling the cool night air on her face. She looked up at the stars, reflecting on the journey she had taken. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She had stood up for herself, faced her fears, and come out stronger than ever. And in the process, she had made a friend, a real friend, someone who had once been her enemy but had now become her ally. Chica joined her outside, a soft smile on her face. "You did it," Chica said, her voice full of admiration. "We did it." Adora nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. "Yeah, we did." The two girls stood there for a moment, side by side, looking at the stars. They weren't just survivors anymore, they were friends. And that, Adora knew, was the sweetest victory of all. Thanks so much for watching. I would like to read your lessons learned from this story in the comment section. And please kindly subscribe to my channel if you're just joining us.